Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Good morning and welcome to Encounter. I'm your host today, Joe Sellepack, the Executive Director at the Broome County Council of Churches. Grandparenting is one of those shifting job descriptions that we have in our current environment. When I was a kid, grandparents were a house that we went to on a holiday. They didn't have an awful lot to do with my day-to-day life. And we did not live with them. They did not live with us. They had their own house. We lived very, very separate lives. However, in the new environment that we're kind of moving in toward, with the price of childcare and the accessibility of childcare and other types of issues that rise within families. We are finding more and more grandparents who are involved in the raising of children, also needing to live with family in order to, in some cases, make ends meet. In other cases, it's not just to make ends meet; it's because they view their vocation with their grandchildren very, very seriously. So, to help us kind of work through some of these issues, I invited Dr. Bruce Epperly to be on Encounter this morning. Welcome to Encounter, here. Bruce. So,
great joy.
So really, I mean, when I think about this whole shifting of grandparenting and how grandparenting is viewed, it's really not. It's a blip. What we experienced as when I was a kid, grandparents have almost always been more active within the family and in raising children than what I experienced when I was young. Can you talk a little bit about that? I'm sure you have some thoughts on that.
Well, yes, and I think that grandparenting is evolving. My experience was similar to yours, Joe. My grandparents were in Iowa. I grew up in California. My parents had moved away. We saw them once a year at best. Things are changing, though. Things are changing indeed because society's changing. I think one of the things we're learning is that it takes a village. I like the Southern African term Ubuntu. I am because of you, we are because of one another, and we're discovering that today's families need each other. Family relationships are always interesting and complicated, and trying to bring together three generations, either under a household or in a neighborhood, requires us to let go of a lot and to choose the greater good. But these days, I think it's difficult in the complexities of life for families where both parents work to do it alone. For some, it's an economic necessity. For some, the cost of childcare is too much. And it's the inability to pay exorbitant prices for childcare is indeed a political and economic issue as well as a personal issue. Right. For others like myself, it's a combination of supporting my son and his daughter-in-law, which is my highest value, and supporting the grandchildren, my two grandchildren, 9 and 11, which are the heart of my wife, Kate's, and my life. And we want to be good ancestors. And we believe that we have a role, a vocation of taking interest in those we love, that we are aiming to be good ancestors, not just for our grandchildren, but for other people's grandchildren as well. So I think the vocation of grandchildren is changing. I remember there was the old joke that says the best part about grandparenting is dropping them off at their parents' house. I now live in a 3-generational house. My wife and I have an apartment in my son and daughter-in-law's house. And we have instant and immediate action with access to the grandchildren as they do to us at times. And that's been a blessing. It's one of the greatest goods in life to be part of their lives. And it really is kind of a way of putting an exclamation point on retirement.
Now, Bruce, you recently wrote a book for that Soul Seeds series that came out on grandparenting, and I know that you've done a lot of other writing. You've written books on healing. You've done books on process theology. You've done books. There have been all kinds of books and thoughts that you've been involved in over the years, and this is like a capstone moment for you. Like it's you've moved from being full-time seminary professor to working in a congregation, and now you're finding yourself in a different in this new environment, and you're writing this book on soul seeds for grandparenting. How different was this project, and how did you do it? How did you find the project itself?
Well, it's interesting. This was the first project of the Soul Seed series that I'd written. I've written a couple others since then, one about healing and wholeness and one about peacemaking and justice seekers in the 101 Soul Seeds series. But when Ellen Santa, who's the publisher at Anamchara Press, was located out of Vestal, New York, asked me to do this, I thought, well, one of the things I'm interested in is being a grandparent working for a better world, hence the title 101 Soul Seeds for Grandparents Working for a Better World. And for me, this is the third part of the adventure. This is the third part of a great adventure. Jimmy Carter made the comment that the times when you are most free in life are when you begin college and are a first-year student, and when you begin retirement. And certainly he has lived out that, and he and Rosalind have lived that out in ways that are superlative. When you begin retirement, and I use the term retirement in quotes because I'll be doing a little teaching and a little preaching along the way, and of course some writing, you have a blank canvas. You can make a lot of different choices, and you can do a little bit like the book I read with my own son 30 years ago, Choose Your Own Adventure. For my wife and I, the adventure involved leaving full-time ministry, moving from Cape Cod to the Washington, D.C. suburbs, leaving a good life behind to have a better life, a life of service. And for me, I think grandparenting has been interesting and retirement has been interesting. The one thing I tell many of my friends who are thinking of retiring is I no longer have the same urgency about the day-to-day I once had. If I don't get that 1,000 words written today, or if I don't finish a lecture today, there's always tomorrow. But I do have greater urgency now about the world condition and the national condition.
Right.
I've come to realize that while I enjoy travel, and I'm looking forward to traveling next year across country and maybe across the Atlantic to Scotland and the British Isles, going back to Iona, my key responsibility is to not drive out on an RV, but to ensure that my grandchildren have a good life locally here in Bethesda, Maryland, where I live, and globally. I think as a grandparent, I've learned that I need to look beyond self-interest. I need to look beyond the sense that it's about this moment in time. I need to look after other people's grandchildren, that they have the same basic fundamental standards of life that my own grandchildren have. I need to look at the grandchildren I'll never meet. I need to look at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 generations beyond. And for me, that means walking my way into a type of politics of grandparenting. I'm not a highly political person. I'm what I might describe as a contemplative, but I'm becoming more of a contemplative activist in retirement. I want to ensure that there's a good planet insofar as I'm able to. So I want to ensure that our government is a leader in responding to climate change. I want to ensure that racism and homophobia are a thing of the past. And so I want to speak out whenever I can about American history and justice and the concerns of people of all races. I want to see every child having the same fundamental economics as my grandchildren have. Square meals, good housing, safe housing, healthcare, good education. Retiring is not about contracting your interest, but expanding your interest of going from self-interest to world loyalty.
Right. And when you were talking about ancestry being something of a vocation, it's interesting. When I was in college, I read Ernest Becker's Denial of Death.
Yes.
And the reason that older folks made us nervous had to do with their proximity to death. And there was a tendency within that period of time for people to close off older folks within homes and do other kinds of things like that. It seems that in our current way of approaching child rearing and other types of things like multi-generational households, like what you're a part of at the moment. At this moment, it seems to me as if there's a shift as to the vocation of ancestry, because we've found that instead of denying death, and maybe this is just something that COVID has launched in us, is a realization that that death is, we're all in that line.
Yes.
We're all in death's line, and at some point we will all end up there. And really, it's better for us to face it and to understand it and to live with it than for us to relegate it to the sideline like what we have in the past. But it leads us to a richer and a deeper and a greater understanding of our present self within relationships. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, certainly can. And this has been a big issue for me in a lot of different ways. In the course of doing some work on retirement and also on grandparenting, I came across a quote. I can't recall who made it, but it was that we as older adults are the best examples of what it means to age to our children and grandchildren.
Right.
And we are the best examples of a type of positive aging. It's been said that your most creative years, and perhaps it's because of the nature of freedom, are 60 to 70. And second to that, 70 to 80. That this is not necessarily a time of diminishment. This could be a time of new passions. It could be a time of new ways of looking at life. I don't believe, at least in my case, I've become much more open-spirited, politically open, much more questioning of authority, probably even than in the time of the 60s and 70s when I was growing up. And we can be good examples. I'm thinking also of that poem of from the Cape Cod poet Mary Oliver, in which on a summer day she asks, "What do you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?"
Yeah.
I talk about such things not in terms of mortality with my younger grandchildren, 9 and 11, my two grandchildren, but in terms of don't waste your life. Don't necessarily take it all so seriously. Everything isn't going to go on your permanent record, but enjoy life, learn, Don't be afraid. Try something new. And I try to take that advice myself. I try to not be afraid. I try to take something new. I think the COVID season has reminded elders like myself, who were in the higher risk group, that life is precious. And that, as the psalmist says, and it's something I say every morning on my pre-dawn walk, this is the day that God has made. Let me rejoice and be glad in it. This is the day. This is the only day I have right now. There are no guarantees. And that was clear in the COVID season.
Right.
There's no guarantees anytime. But let me live this day fully, lovingly, in line with the spiritual and moral arc of the universe, not knowing entirely, as Theodore Parker, what that is. He's the originator of the term moral arc of the universe, but knowing that I have a role in promoting the moral arc so it leans toward life and beauty and reconciliation rather than the opposites of that. It means taking care of the small stuff, but not obsessing on the small stuff. I love that saying by the Jewish mystics. When you save one soul, it's as if you're saving the universe.
Yeah.
Because the universe is not complete, and the community isn't complete till the 100th sheep comes in. And for me, a little bit like the 12-step movements, one day at a time is probably too generous. When you save one moment, when you save one encounter, you're saving the universe, because I believe the universe is saved or healed one action at a time. And although each one of us fails at that, gets grumpy or impatient, short-sighted and self-interested, for me, it's the sense that this is a moment that I want to live in this place that I find myself. In Bethesda, Maryland, as an American citizen, as a citizen in 2021 of the planet, I want to find myself seeking life and not death, seeking justice and not injustice, speaking for beauty and equality and welcome and hospitality and not the opposite of those. To me, that's part of my vocation. And I think Frederick Buechner said something like, your vocation is where your deep passion meets the world's great hungers, or where your gifts, as I say, meet the world's needs. And the world's needs are often right in front of you. With a child doing homework, with a child being tucked in bed, with walking to the bus stop and talking with other parents or grandparents in my case, with aiming that those are holy moments, that a little bit like Jacob when he wakes up at Bethel.
Right.
God was in this place and I did not know it. And the goal for me is God was in this place and I know it.
My guest today is Dr. Bruce Epperly. We've been talking about his book, 101 Soul Seeds for Grandparenting for a Better World. So Bethel, this is a great, I always love that story, and of Jacob waking up and realizing that he met with God here, and that space kind of being where we meet God in the world around us, and these thin places that we find in our lives. So grandparenting is one of those places where we meet God, and then perhaps through us, our children and our grandchildren meet God as well. It's kind of like what relationships do for us. It's the and how I view I've read through your books on process theology. It's almost like it's a yet another understanding of the importance of relationship and understanding God. How do you? There's a relationship there, and I'd like you to unpack that maybe a little bit for people.
Well, certainly, and I would note that I actually did write a book on process theology that was aimed at an older child or a parent of an older child, called Piglet's Process. Process theology for everyone. That part of the book is a dialogue between Piglet, the Winnie the Pooh character, and a theologian, being me. And I think good theology should be explainable to children.
Right.
For me as a process theologian, and I use this as a window to look out into the world. For me as a process theologian, it means that holiness is everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
That the opportunity to meet the Holy One, God, the many names of God. I'm not going to restrict God to my tradition, and I believe also agnostics and those who have been turned off by religion also confront the holy. They just give different names for it. God doesn't do the exclusion, we do. But this is a holy moment. This is a moment of possibility. This is a moment when we have the freedom to share in God's vision. Again, I want to quote that, Jewish mystics who say that our calling is tikkun ho'olam, to help mend the world and repair the world. I see in process thought the importance of interdependence. So what I'm doing here in Bethesda, Maryland, is not only making a difference to people who are watching this in Binghamton, New York area, but also by my prayers and actions and advocacy, it will shape people I'll never meet. We're connected. We're connected. That the future is open. It's not decided. That's a big deal. I would contend that biblical theology does not talk about a fully decided future. It talks about a future in which we're companions with God, trying to bring about the best possible world, and that our actions not only make a difference to God, they make a difference to our neighbor. I think, as Teresa of Avila says, we are the hands and feet of God. And in terms of grandparenting, I'm not a doctrinal person. I'm obviously a trained theologian. I live with theological concepts all the time. But I feel the best way to share the holy with my own immediate family and my two grandchildren is just simply to live out a holy life.
Yeah.
To live out a life in which my word is my bond, to live out a life in which they are cared for and I will sacrifice for the greater good and their well-being. Live out a life in which I treat everyone as far as possible with compassion, and see them as fully human beings, as children, deserving of respect, care, affirmation, and acceptance. And I think that's the God with skin that some people talk about, the God that is embodied in daily life. I don't happen to believe that Jesus was particularly doctrinal.
No.
When Jesus dealt with the children in that famous passage, he says, "Let the children come to me," and he put them on his knee and he blessed them. There's no discussion there about him preaching the Sermon on the Mount to them.
Right.
They might have gotten something about the parables, though. They knew about sheep and they knew about seeds. But I don't believe Jesus' ministry was primarily doctrinal. It was experiential. It was about the healing and the hospitality. And I try to embody that and encourage people to embody that with people that they meet randomly. I try to model it when I'm with my grandchildren and when I'm not with them in encounters at the supermarket.
Right.
I even, and call me silly, and I think I am, I even say thank you to Alexa and to Google, partly because I want the Thanksgiving is a habit, and I want my grandchildren not to take anything for granted.
Right.
That even in what we call an inanimate object deserves a certain type of respect for its very being. And if you practice saying thank you, again, character is formed by doing things over and over again, so that when you're at the supermarket and somebody gives you an extra $10, you'll give it back. You know, you'll be the same person when the lights are on and the lights are off, when somebody's watching and somebody's not watching. And those are sort of the behavioral modeling I try to give to our children, grandchildren, without saying any sort of philosophy to them. I mean, I give them plenty of philosophy, but the main philosophy is the life you live.
Yeah, I have often thought that, for me, the biggest growth I had in my own personal beliefs, as far as my understanding of God and my understanding of humanity, it all shifted when I had to change my first diaper.
Yeah.
It's those moments when you realize the frailty of human beings, as well as the understanding of the fact that we all have to deal with that. It seems like that is where the rubber meets the road, right? So
Yes.
yeah, we are in a different, and I want, and as a grandparent, you're learning that more, I think, than what you would have even leading up to this moment, right?
Yes. And I think I want to make each moment count. And
Right.
I'm fallible, make mistakes, occasionally get impatient. But to kind of push toward that high moral arc and spiritual arc, to see this moment as a holy moment, to see this time as a precious time, to really embody love and care and hospitality, initially in my own family because they're around me and I'm around them, but then to extend it to the bus stop, to the school gathering, to the politics of our community and nation, and to care for the world, and to affirm the young people like Greta Thunberg and others that are doing it, 16, 17, 18, and 19, or the Parkland kids that are trying to change the world. They're part of the prophets of our time. So grandparenting is a vocation. It's a vocation of love and looking beyond your self-interest to sacrifice for a greater good.
My guest today has been Dr. Bruce Epperly. He's the author of 101 Soul Seeds for Grandparenting to a Better World. I want to thank him for being on Encounter. I want to thank WBNG for having us be on their station, to WMBF and to Spectrum, where this will be aired as well. I want all of our viewers to be kind and generous to each other. Have a great day.
Thank you.